Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. I am so excited to share about our 2024 virtual MTSS Summit happening this December. It's a 2-day event filled with MTSS inspiration and practical strategies you can start using immediately. Join hundreds of educators from across the country and the world to explore MTSS fidelity in action. And we are excited to offer a giveaway for our podcast listeners. Share your biggest aha moment from today's episode in our latest LinkedIn post and win a free pass to our summit for yourself or a colleague. Now for today's episode. I remember as a senior in high school, the pressure to answer the question, what's next for you? Or are you excited about college? The time period was full of anxieties about the future, and it's no different for students today. That transition out of high school is so much easier with the right support. So today we're going to chat about how to help students with their emotional readiness with our guest, Jessica Orenstein, an expert in behavioral science and a public health practitioner for the Jed Foundation. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Larissa. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, so to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what maybe you wish you had known about
Ooh.
college as a high school student.
Well, you already noted I am a behavioral scientist and public health practitioner. I currently work as a director of programmatic partnerships at Jed, so I'm fortunate to work with partners like Branching Minds to just bring resources, mental health resources, emotional well-being resources, and programming to youth all over through these partnerships. And I've been doing this work. Goodness, I won't say for how long because that ages me, but I've been doing this work for a while and I really enjoy it. I think it's important to not only bring about programming so that, people have access to it, but to make sure that, or try my best to ensure that these programs and resources are actually being utilized. It's one thing to have access to it. It's another thing to actually utilize the resources that are provided to you within the community in some capacity. So I've been doing this work for some time and just, I'm really passionate about it.
That's amazing. So, when you
Oh
were a
yeah,
high
you
school
asked me.
senior,
Yeah.
when you were a high school senior, what was something you wish you had known about college or just after high school time?
I wish I would have known that I could change my mind as often as I wanted to.
That is a oh my gosh. I kind of wish I would have known that too. Because I was, in prep for this episode, I was just kind of thinking, I was like, I think I was fairly confident about my life choice,
Hmm.
nervous about the transition, but like, I wish I would have known just to like, it's okay to change your mind.
Right. And I think it's kind of wild that, at I guess you start thinking about college and your life and your career around 15,
Yeah.
16, if sometimes
Oh,
before,
middle
depending on,
school. That was
yeah,
a big thing
sometimes
in middle school.
before,
Yeah.
right. And I think it's kind of wild to expect someone so young and their brain is still developing. They don't even know who they are, let alone like what they like, to just know for sure, for certain what they want to do. And I think it's great if you do. I mean, more kudos to those who actually know and pursue that career. But I think it's important to normalize the fact that it's okay to not know and to change your mind.
Yeah. Well, we'll dig into that more in a little bit, but I remember there just being a lot of emotions as I prepared to leave high school and go to college.
Hmm.
Um, and it was exciting but scary. So, could you maybe share a little bit about some of those common emotional challenges that students are facing when they transition to college or to the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, such a big transition leaving high school, and I love that you said going to college or the workforce because there's a lot of youth that do not go straight to college. I mean, some do, obviously, we know that, but there's a lot that don't. And I think with this major life transition for anyone, some of the biggest emotions that you may feel are homesickness, loneliness, struggling to make connections with other people. And so, like, just the homesickness, for instance, you are most likely not in that same environment that you've been in for 17, 18 years, unless you are maybe commuting from home, for instance. But
Mhm.
even then, you're not in the same environment. Things are very drastically different. And so just not having that solid foundation around, meaning the people that you are so used to waking up to and saying goodnight to, are not there physically with you. And so that homesickness, that longing for some of that normalization that you have had over, the majority of your life, all of your life up until that point, is not there in the same capacity. And then the loneliness, I mean, is attached to the homesickness, but that building of those building new connections, are challenging because these are new people, and
Yeah.
you're trying to find, quote unquote, your people. And that journey can be a bit lonely for folks. Research
Yeah.
does suggest that quite a few people experience this, experience homesickness, experience loneliness as they go into this new environment and adjust.
Yeah. Well, and I remember I was a college RA, resident assistant in the dorms, and I always remember, like, the effort that we took in the beginning to, like, do community events, do things to help kids form connections, kids, young
Hmm.
people. And I think that that is sort of underestimated, like, the aspect of college. Yes, you are there to get an education, but if you're choosing to live on campus, or you're choosing even to, like, live in a sorority or fraternity, like, that community is a big part of that
Yeah.
experience, because you are away from your family. I kind of, like, the way you were talking made me think about this, because you're away from your family, and that support network that you're so used to having is, like, it is sort of an urgent need for you to find those, because there's a lot of people that really struggled when they didn't form those connections.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, we see it all the time. And, I actually, before I got into public health, I worked, in higher education, for about 8 years. So I saw it firsthand, like the anxiety, the sadness, the irritability that can come during this transition for so many. I mean, sadness and anxiety looks different on different people,
Yeah.
right? Research shows that. We know that. And so, as RA, I'm sure you saw that as
Yeah. Oh,
well. It was
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think the other aspect too was, like, in that transition, there's a lot of upheaval of life. And I've been through,
Hmm.
you and I probably both have been through a lot of different life transitions. That any of that time that happens, like, the people around you change, and you're encountering different struggles. Even if, just like, when I've moved across town, I've had different routes, different
Hmm.
walking trails, the resilience to be able to handle some of those things. Everyone handles it very differently.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I think that's all a part of sort of, like, emotional readiness for that transition. And so I'm curious, because between deciding on college and career and other life paths, students can feel a lot of pressure. What what impact do you think these big decisions have on their emotional well-being? And how can we maybe ease that stress? Because let's talk maybe a little bit before they move into that next step. What is that? What can we do to help them in that moment of deciding what's next?
I mean, I think we kind of touched on it already, which is just that their mind can change and they have time to make those changes, right? Nothing is most for the most part. Things can be, you can step into this at any point. You can step into whatever phase at any point. And I think that we put a lot of unnecessary pressure, and I think it's important for us to, really check ourselves on how much pressure we're putting on young adolescents, to make the quote unquote right decision,
Mhm.
to make the decision to go to the right college, or to choose the right career, or if they're going into the workforce, to choose the right job, right? And so these pressures that we're putting on them are just unrealistic. And society, I mean, especially growing up in the digital world where all of our youth are at this point, they have a an added pressure outside of what's happening in the home and in school to perform, to
Mhm.
be perfect, to find that right fit. And instead, we should be checking to make sure that they're doing emotionally well. Are they emotionally thriving in these places, in these spaces? Instead of finding the right fit, where could you go? Where can you go that would help you to thrive emotionally? Where can you go that the classes are a good size for you? For me, going into college, I knew that as an introvert with some extroverted tendencies, but mainly an introvert, I would not thrive in a big 10 school or just a big school in general. So I was looking for class sizes that were relatively small, where I could really get to know my professor. They knew me by name. Those things mattered to me. And when going into the workforce, I know that that probably matters to people as well. Like, where can I go that's a good ease into it, where maybe I'm not in like this high pressure, high stakes environment in the workplace. Maybe it's just a little bit more chill and relaxed, and a good transition for me out of high school.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about that and like, I grew up in a small town, and so I was so excited to go, to the next big thing, to a bigger place. And I think I underestimated how much that transition to like there's people around all the time and there's like nowhere to go just to like
Yeah. Yeah.
be alone. I struggled with that in college, of just like a place to just be by myself. And I think us as, educators and people who are supporting young people is like asking them those right questions of what environment do you think you would thrive in? Because I think that's better than like, what do you want to do? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes, because there's lots of different avenues to become a teacher or an engineer. There's lots of different great schools to do that for. There's not like one perfect decision. And I like what you said about it is you can change your mind at any time.
Yeah, and it doesn't define who they are at all.
Yeah.
And I think that so many people, so many young people place their decisions make it so that their decision is an identifier of who they are,
Mhm.
right? That's not who you are. It's just what you happen to do or happen to go for X amount of time, or for X amount of hours in a day.
Yeah.
I'm trying my best when I'm speaking to people. I'm working on it. It's a behavior change, so it takes some time. But I don't ask people like, uh, you know, what do you do for work? Is what I
Oh,
try to ask.
yeah, that is
Instead, not what
such
do
a
you do?
hard
Who are you?
that
you
is
know.
that's a really hard one. I like to ask, how do you spend your days?
Hmm.
Because just in the sense of like, because there's a lot of people that have really abnormal different types of jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So, okay, not all students are going to ask for help if they're struggling during this time. So, what are some signs that we as educators can look out for, and that a student might be having a tough time with this time period, and how can we support them during this transition?
So this is a good question. I think that there are obviously identifiers as to when someone is emotionally struggling, but I think that a lot of them aren't just on display. So if you don't see them, it's okay. And as educators, you're not a clinician, and that's also okay, but your gut might be telling you something, and we always say at Jed to follow your gut.
Mhm.
Ask those questions. Some warning signs can be just obviously mood changes. Are there increased irritability, like I was saying before, or sadness that you're seeing in a student or a young person around you? So it's like I said, it might be like the workforce or whatever it is. But do you see these signs? Behaviorally, are they expressing thoughts of self harm or withdrawing from things that they genuinely love and enjoy doing? If you're a coach, for instance, we talk to a lot of coaches because I think they are an incredible resource for youth, and oftentimes the first person that youth go to because they're so connected to them in a different kind of way. And we say, like, are you seeing like changes in someone's performance on the field or on the track, or in what, I was a cheerleader. So, in in gymnastics, like, I don't know, like, are
Yeah.
you seeing these changes? And then you obviously have some of the physical changes that can be like, sleep and lack thereof, or more sleep. It just can manifest itself in so many different ways, and those are some of like the bigger signs that somebody is
Yeah.
struggling.
Yeah. Well, and I think even, because students may not always ask for help. And I always felt like as a teacher, I in anticipation of like, "Hey, this might be hard for you, and that's okay."
Hmm.
Or, "If I were you, I might be thinking this." And so, like kind of giving examples or giving sort of make normalizing that struggle a little bit,
Yeah.
because that way they're not feeling like, "Oh, I'm so weird that I'm feeling this pressure. I'm struggling with this. No one else is," like feeling alone in that struggle. Because I always felt like kind of providing examples or even having people, I always felt like having, graduated seniors who were in college come back and talk to like seniors, like the people who had just gone through that process, or because it just helps them feel like, oh, okay, I'm not weird for feeling this. I'm not weird for struggling with this. I'm it's okay that I'm sad. It is hard,
Yeah.
I think that those are always like really important, because they may not, if it's not really evident that they're struggling, that can be
Yeah.
a good thing.
And I think when you're saying it's not so evident that they're struggling, one thing that I did leave out that I have been talking about for years is academic performance doesn't always look like someone who is not passing your class, or just someone who's struggling could it's not always someone who's not passing. Sometimes that person who's struggling is the person that refuses to get anything less than 100% on everything. Those are also the youth that we should be checking in on and making sure that they're okay. That pressure to be perfect, the pressure to have this or that on every exam, every test, every assignment, um, is that it's just a lot, and that's something that we should also look out for as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, kind of in that realm, like, resilience is a key to kind of overcoming some of these challenges post high school life.
Hmm.
And in your opinion, what could schools and, educators be doing to prepare students for that emotional transition after graduation?
I mean, it's just I'm going to say this simply, even though it's not simple. um, Focusing on the holistic side of things, focusing on the whole person, instead of just how they're performing academically. Now, I do know that there's been a shift in the education system where we are focusing on testing. We focus on scores and all of that, but that is not what's going to support that person leaving your school, because that's great for while they're there, and it does help the school overall. But does it help that person holistically?
Mm,
Focusing on how can I support this person emotionally, checking in with them, asking them what would be a good fit for them, instead of some perfect school or workplace as they transition out, asking them other questions outside of academic, life.
mhm,
How are they succeeding socially? How do I get them more involved in social programming or extracurriculars at the school or in the community? Um, and then, I mean, I can obviously say partnering with us, because we do this work. I mean, it's
yeah.
the truth. We do this work. We've been doing it. This is one of Set to Go, which is a program that is all about the emotional transition out of high school. Was our second major program, one of our second, like I think our second major program at Jed, but definitely the first high school program that we had at the Jed Foundation, because we knew that so many first year college students um, were dropping out of school. They were
Yeah.
engaging in very risky behavior. And we were just like, why? And so we did some surveys, we did, our research, we did our due diligence, and we found out that they didn't feel like they were emotionally prepared. They felt like they were missing such a key aspect of that transition, and that was um, just the emotional side of things. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, partner
Yeah.
with us. But also, there are other
Yeah.
things you can do.
Well, I think we don't talk about the emotional part of that transition for students. And I think there's lots of different transitions in a student's journey, whether it be from elementary to middle school. I know as a seventh grade teacher and I had incoming seventh
Hmm.
graders, we talked, there was a lot to handle, and students being able to handle more classes and things like that. And then even just that emotional transition from middle school to high school,
Hmm.
all of those. And I think sometimes is even like talking about those as small transitions to help them for the bigger one, I think
Yeah.
is really a great, thing to do. But also, yeah, not ignoring of like, hey, there are aspects of kind of being an adult that, maybe parents talk about, maybe they don't, but like just that, and I think even parents sometimes don't anticipate some of those transition for students because maybe their experience was different. And I think for a lot of like first generation college students or people who are transitioning out of high school and doing a different career than their parents did or a different path, sometimes that's harder. I know, like I've had different conversations with my own parents because they had a different experience than I did. And so I think that is sometimes just even being aware there is this transition that is emotional too.
Yeah.
It's not just about the academics.
Yeah, and I think, so to what you just said is an aspect of just storytelling and being vulnerable. I never even knew that my parents struggled, in certain aspects of life until I was an adult going through these experiences, and they were just like, "Oh yeah, well I went through that too," and I'm just like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And so I think it's really important to talk to your student or your child about things that you struggled with, and just acknowledging, yes, the times were different, but this is something that was really challenging for me, and I just want you to be aware that it might be challenging for you, and I'm here to support you, I'm here to help, I'm here to listen, um, and even maybe make connections if I can't help.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. You don't have to solve everything, but if you notice that, maybe a connection needs to be made therapeutically or even just mentor wise, make the connection.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Well, and I think even too, there's a lot of resources in a lot of colleges. I know that like, my university had a lot of resources for people. And I mean, I've had friends work at the university level for students kind of coming in, whether it be like mentor or, mental health facilities and things like that, or counselors. But I just think even having touching base with an advisor or, as a resident assistant, that was a
Yeah.
little bit of that training that I had to sort of help students, especially incoming freshmen, with sort of that transition and to help them, be like, hey, it's midterms. Here's things you should know, or
Right.
let's all go eat together to make sure that people were kind of getting out of their dorms. And I even remember as a college freshman, sitting through, we would have these different presentations that the RAs would do just about
Mm-hmm.
safety and about things like that. Oh, I wouldn't have even known that on my
Exactly.
own.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
there are like those kind of resources. And I was even thinking about a young person going into the workforce, of that transition of like maybe they're getting an apartment all by themselves, for the
Or filling
first
out
time.
HR paperwork.
I don't know. I
I'm an
still don't know
adult.
how to fill out a W-4 correctly. So
But these are things. These
yeah,
are real things. Can you imagine leaving high school and
yeah.
going into the workforce, which again is common?
I still
And
had to call my mom at my first job to be like, "What kind of healthcare do I need to
hey,
this?"
there's a reason that people of all ages have accountants, because
Yeah.
things change, and sometimes you got to put a one or a two in a box, and you don't know.
Well, and
These are important things.
yeah, well, now you could just ask ChatGPT what you need.
That is very true. That is true. But there's importance in human interaction.
Oh, yeah. But I do think I think it's really helpful to, I think even like if a student has that support person, right? Maybe they don't have a parent to call to
Hmm.
ask those questions,
Yeah.
and I think that I always just appreciate people in the workforce who sort of have that mentorship mindset of like,
Hmm.
here's a young person coming in, maybe they don't know.
Yeah.
Can I be a resource to them? I think is a really helpful mindset. And I mean, I'm always kind of sort of thinking that way because I appreciated those people who did that for me. Um, But I think that, like, helping students be like, here's people to look out for, or ask questions. I think even advocating for yourself, like teaching students how to do that well.
Yeah.
Because, I can think of so many students that they're very shy or they're very introverted, and they have depended on their parents or teachers to do the talking for them. And so really helping with some of those skills
Yeah.
is really key. Which kind of leads me to the independence. Like,
Hmm.
this independence is a big shift for many students. So what are some other steps or habits that students can develop now to help them handle that freedom and responsibility that they might face?
Well, you already touched on like just your parents not being there. So that's the major factor. It's just like your parents aren't there. They're not there to remind you to get up, to do this, to I don't know, once a week wash your clothes, or do you know how to wash your clothes?
Wash
So
your sheets too?
exactly, yes. So this is a really great time, and also a monumental time in people's lives to for parents and guardians to really kind of pull back, in certain areas, and start helping youth do certain things for themselves, right?
Yeah,
So making sure that they have something as simple as their alarm set up every morning to get up, and I would suggest multiple alarms, because most likely one's going to hit that snooze,
yeah,
maybe even three. Who knows? So having that. One of my colleagues mentioned recently that his daughter went to the pharmacy on their own for the first time. That is a big one, right? So going to the pharmacy, maybe it kind of works different depending on your insurance, but sometimes you can go right in and just say like I'm here to pick up something, or you have to show your card and
mhm,
some other information. But that is a great thing to do. Doing your own laundry once a week, washing your sheets once a week. Um, just kind of finding ways to build their own routine,
mhm,
identifying a routine for your young person is important. So from start of the morning to before the end of the day,
yeah.
it's just really important to help someone establish routines now, so that they can have something to identify with when they get to this place where their parent or their guardian is no longer there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this kind of goes into a little bit of like parenting techniques, but I did see recently that idea of not doing everything, slowly building responsibility in even from when they're young to, like, having them to help do things around the house. I think learning to cook is a really big one too. Is there's so many young people that may not know how to do that.
Yeah.
And then I also think helping. I always felt as a teacher of like really helping students understand of like, this is your learning environment. You get to have like control and say, and your how you contribute and how you interact with your peers affects the environment. And
Yeah.
so that's part of being a good steward of your workplace, or your, building some of those kinds of things within the curriculum, which is sometimes hard. It's just very, you have to have that intentional thinking as an educator of just like, this is all building to that emotional readiness. Or I think some people called it just those soft skills you have to
Yeah, the
be in the
life
workplace.
skills, independent living skills, like all these things are something that, unfortunately, in many cases today, like if we don't teach people these skills, they're just not going to obtain them in other areas of their life, right? So I do think that we owe our youth that. We owe them the ability to, develop these skills so that they are better prepared and lined up for success in their own way, success,
Yeah.
as they transition out of high school. I just think it's really important. And even just like conflict resolution, like how do you
Mhm.
deal with conflict? You're going out into the real world, and maybe how you deal with conflict now is not going to be handled in the best way moving
Mhm.
forward. So how do we help you to manage your emotions better? First of all, how do we help you identify what you're going through,
Mhm.
identify that feeling, identify that emotion, manage it within yourself, and so that way you can better manage your relationships with others,
Yeah.
because that's just huge. And then Yeah. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that we can be teaching youth as they transition. I think we named quite a few, but there's a
Yeah. I was gonna say, and
lot.
that I mean, I was gonna ask a little bit about, like, things to integrate into the curriculum, but, like, that's we just talked about all of those different things, and I think that, you know, I know a lot of high school counselors that, work with youth as they're choosing sort of what's next and making those steps. And I think that I mean, sort of in this conversation, I'm just thinking, man, it takes a village, like in the sense that it's not just about what schools are doing, but it's also about how we can help support parents. Even I think the set to go, you have options for students, for parents, for educators, and I think that that's a great, those are great tools to have so that everyone is working towards that common good of helping students emotionally be ready for that transition.
Yeah.
I would love for you to just kind of outline a little bit more about the Set to Go program and kind of describe what that is and how it can help.
Yeah. So I mentioned it before, but Set to Go was the first high school program that we had at the Jed Foundation, and it is all about the emotional transition out of high school. Uh, just that. We make sure that youth have resources, but also, like you said, that educators have resources and caregivers have resources. What we know as a public mental health organization is that um, your ecosystem influences your behavior. It's not enough to just share resources with youth about what they can expect as they transition out of high school, how to support them when they're making major life decisions, how to tell them that their minds can change, how to help them if they're feeling financial stress and anxiety around these big decisions, because that does come. It's not that is a huge factor for many youth when it comes to making decisions for that next phase of life. But educating educators, educating caregivers, we are of a different generation than the youth that are in school. What we grew up believing is may not be what they grew up believing. And so it's important for us to, develop a new set of skills so that we can support them. So, how do we, again, like we said earlier, relieve some of that stress and that pressure that we're putting on you to make the right decision when they are still developing mentally and their brain is still growing? Like,
And their
how do,
interests are changing,
yeah,
and yeah, yeah.
and how do we help them explore different areas that they may not have had the opportunity to explore, that they may not have even thought of in recent or past years? How do we talk to our caregivers at home? Because when youth go home, like, doing things in the school is just not enough. Again, it comes down to the ecosystem. How do we support the community with these conversations? How does a community, it's just, it can go on, but again, it is ultimately making sure that the ecosystem around our youth know how to have that conversation and know how to help youth prepare emotionally. And that means sometimes getting out of our own way and some of our own beliefs that we have around mental health and emotional well-being, and having those hard conversations with ourselves first so that we can better support youth emotionally as they transition.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think, removing expectations that you might have of students.
Exactly.
Because I think that that is, the pressure to pick the right thing. Also, it comes from things that students think that is expected of them. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and just help them to develop a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, help them develop a plan.
Sometimes the emotional readiness comes when you feel more confident that you know where you kind of have a inkling of where you're going.
Yeah, like while I'm no longer in higher education, I'm still very much passionate about that transition out of high school. So there are a few folks that I mentor in my community, and the first thing I do with them is create a plan. I'm
Yeah.
just like, okay, let's top of the year down to, matriculation. A
Yeah.
lot of people do not understand that process, that summer after high school can be one of the most stressful summers, because it's so, everything just seems so uncertain. Everything just seems
Mhm.
so up in the air, so new. You haven't quite gotten to this next phase.
Yeah.
but you know something's coming.
Well, it's that anticipatory
Exactly.
anxiety that you have about the unknown. Oh, I've
Exactly.
experienced that multiple times in my
We
life where
experience it still.
we
You know?
we still do.
Yeah,
You
so
know,
it's
and
important, yeah.
I think overall in the midst of our conversation, just that idea that helping students understand that part of developing a plan of their future is really sort of understanding who do I want to be as a person, and know that it doesn't matter the path, like that is the constant. And so you want to sort of help them in the emotional readiness is about like, no matter sort of whether it's the workforce or college or a skills school or whatever it might be, it's about, you know, being emotionally ready for whatever's to come. So,
Yep. And
yeah.
making sure you can pivot and
Make sure you can pivot.
yeah, yeah.
That's an I don't know if that's a soft skill that we've identified, but it needs to be, like,
It
the
does.
ability
It
to
does.
pivot with grace.
Yeah, yeah, and give yourself grace. Yeah.
Yes,
Forgiving
exactly.
yourself for making mistakes is also a big one. So I can go
Yeah.
on for days.
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
stop
sure
there.
you can. Well, this was a fantastic conversation, and we will
Yes, I
definitely
loved it.
share we're gonna share all the set to go resources in our show notes and let people know about them. And it's a great Jed Foundation is a great place to access lots of really great social and emotional student well-being resources. And so we're excited to continue to partner with you guys. And Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. And yes, if anybody's out there and wants to partner with us, we are here and happy to support.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.